Hello, everyone. Welcome to our February Collective TA, Roadmaps and Road Tests, Strategies to Strengthen Your Partnership for Prevention. And this will, John McKay will be giving you a presentation about the roadmaps, and road tests are LI squared to help you to document your innovations and your prevention strategies, and to test how well they're going and what might need to be changed. So it's always interesting. I'll always learn something new every time I hear this presentation. So I hope that you learned something today as well. John is a wonderful presenter, as well as open to any questions you have. If you have specific questions that you might need to ask your coach or ask John, there'll be times for Q&A and discussion. So sit back and let's take this ride on our roadmap presentation. Thank you. Jeanette or John?
Oh, welcome everyone. I'm going to turn this right over to John.
All right. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Jeanette. Let's jump in. We have a lot of ground to cover today. As Lisa said, we're going to have some time for you to chat as teams with your coaches. At the end, we're also going to have a chance to hear from a couple of sites about how they've applied this. So I'm going to move through content without belaboring a lot of points, even though I'd like to cover a fair amount of ground. And I hope that by the end of this session, that you're walking away with three things. One is, yes, I hope that you actually walk away from a 90-minute webinar on roadmaps or theories of change feeling motivated. That's my goal. That might be a tall order, but that's my hope. And that you'll see sort of the value in this for your FastLC initiative. I also hope that you walk away with an understanding of what are some of those basic steps for building a roadmap for change or conducting a road test, not a rod test. And third, committing to an action step, that there's some sort of an application for you, right? Some sort of takeaway, whether it's, hey, we're going to think a little bit more about road mapping and road testing, or hey, maybe we're in a piloting phase, and so we can incorporate some of this into what we're doing right this very minute. With that, let's get to the content. I want to talk just very briefly about designing for humans. A term that you've probably heard a lot and that many of you are probably familiar with is human-centered design. And I think human-centered design is really relevant for what we're talking about today, because the work that you're doing, the work that involves testing and tweaking and iterating on innovations in our human services programs, is ultimately about designing for humans. It is about centering a process around the human experience, particularly the humans that your programs are designed to serve, right? The families, the children, the adults, as well as the humans who are administering and delivering that program, your staff, your professionals, your partners in the community. And I think human-centered design is a great lens. It's a pair of glasses that you can put on to really think about your work, and to do so in a way that puts the human experience at the center. And I think that's really the first principle here, is that when we talk about, building out a roadmap for what is it that we want to change, putting people first in that process can be really transformative. Not necessarily what is the program goal, not necessarily what is the governor asking us to do, not necessarily what can the budget afford. Those are really important considerations and factors. But putting people first guarantees that ultimately we are designing for the very people this is designed to affect and impact. Second, part of human-centered design is helping all of us doing the work make this move from empathy to insight. What I mean by that is that we start in a place of empathy, which is to relate and connect ourselves more than just sort of in our heads, but also in our emotions, in our relations with the people who are being served and doing that work. What is their experience like? How is it good? How is it not so good? How could it be better? What are their values, their wants, their needs, their desires? And from that learning with curiosity at the forefront of our minds, what insights does that generate for us? So it's putting on your researcher cap, and it's asking questions to understand and empathize with the people doing the frontline work and the people served by the frontline work in order to generate new insights into how we could do the work better. Third, human-centered design is about envisioning possibilities. TANF and child welfare are highly regulated programs. We don't deal in the realm of possibilities often, right? We deal in the realm of compliance and regulation and mandatory and what must be done and risk mitigation. So it's a stretch for us to sort of take that step into the realm of what's possible, what could be possible. What have I not even questioned to date because I'm sort of head down, right, fixated on this thing. That's not a criticism. That's the nature of the beast. That's the system that we find ourselves in. But human-centered design is about routinely stepping back and envisioning possibilities, not in a silo and not solo, but in partnership with people. And then taking all of those possibilities and starting to then ask the question, what could we do? What's feasible? It's also about engaging others in participatory research, right? And when I say research, I'm really just talking about posing questions and then finding ways to get information to answer those questions. I'm not talking about you need to go get a master's or a PhD in research methods. This is something that anybody and everybody can do. And what I hope to cover in today's session are some really practical ways that you can engage people all around you, the families you serve, the frontline staff that do the work, in a process of participating and asking questions and answering questions. And lastly, human-centered design is about rapid iteration. That might feel a little jargony. What I mean by that is it's about this cycle of testing and tweaking, finding new, better, and innovative ways to do the same thing that we keep doing, right? The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting a different result. So human-centered design is going to help us think about doing things a little bit differently every time or every so often to figure out how could this be better and what could we learn. For those of you that had a chance to take part in the initial convening back in October, which feels a little bit like ancient history at this point, I talked about this framework for evidence-driven change. And maybe you're like, yeah, John, I don't remember any of that. That's fine. That is okay, because I'm going to give you a crash course in it right now. The work that you are doing is important change work in your states and your tribal communities. And the goal of a framework for evidence-driven change is simply to say, as you do that change, let's be intentional and let's be systematic in asking questions, designing new solutions, and then seeing if what we designed is effectively answering the questions that we asked. That's, in a nutshell, this process of learn, innovate, improve. And today, we're really going to home in on the innovate and the improve phase, right? Much of the work that your teams have done to date has been focused on that learn phase, unpacking your motivation for change in developing these partnerships for prevention, taking a good look at your program environment, your state context, your tribal community, and figuring out what factors are at play here. Who are the partners that we need to engage? The innovate stage is about designing that solution and being really concrete about it. That's a roadmap for change. The improve phase is about testing and refining until your goals are met. That's a road test. And so I want to give you some practical ways to make that happen. When we think about the innovate phase, this idea that you're designing a solution, I like to think of it as what you're doing and how you're doing it. So what you're doing is the it, right? I could go down the list of all 10 of our sites, and each of you could probably start to explain to me, what is your initiative? When you talk about your FAST-LC prevention initiative, what is it? What are the ingredients of that recipe, right? If you're baking a cake, you got to have a core set of ingredients. And so that's the what goes into it. But in order to bake that cake, right, you've also got to have some process steps. There's got to be some process of bringing those ingredients together so that they actually produce a cake. You can't just throw all the ingredients into a bowl, shake it around a little bit, and out comes the cake, right? So we need a set of strategies. We need a set of steps to bring about the change, to take the raw ingredients and actually make it into something meaningful. That's the how. And so for every one of your FAST-LC interventions and initiatives, there's both a what it is and a how we bring it about. And I'll talk a little bit more about those change strategies. And then if you've got a what and you've got a how, then you've essentially got a recipe or a roadmap for change. And that's where there should be a compelling narrative, a story, in the same way that if grandma writes down her super secret cake recipe for you, you've got the ingredients and you've got the steps, and that should tell a clear and compelling story for how to bake grandma's super secret cake, right? And the easier it is to follow that recipe, the better chance we have of replicating and sustaining grandma's super secret delicious cake. But if that set of steps and ingredients is not clear, or it doesn't tell a compelling sort of process for me to follow, then I'm going to have a hard time replicating the cake. So not to belabor that metaphor too much, but at the end of the day, your roadmap should be clear. It should tell that narrative, that story of what it is and how we get it to happen. When we talk about ingredients, there's a set of ingredients for the work that you guys are doing. And some of you may recognize this. I shared the visual with you in Bethesda back in October. But when you think about what it takes to get to positive impact in this space, there's kind of 4 key ingredients. There's what it is you're doing. There's how you're going to do it, which I just talked about, right? What and how. But then there's the context in which you're going to do it. That enabling context. How is the environment in your state, in your counties, in your districts, in your regions supportive and enabling the work around collaboration that you want to have? And relatedly, implementation quality. How do we make sure that what we're doing is high quality, is as we intend it to be? We got to have a way of knowing that. If we don't have a way of knowing that, there's no way for this thing to be scaled or sustained across your tribal community or across your state. And so those 4 ingredients really make up what it takes to get to a significant positive difference. So let's talk about building a roadmap. At a basic level, this is what it looks like, right? These 4 kind of core boxes: a solution, a set of change strategies, and a set of outcomes. And really what's going to affect how that plays out, essentially what's going to affect your journey along that roadmap, is this set of influencers, factors that are going to help you implement the solution and factors that are going to hinder you implementing that solution, right? And so your change strategies, that is, how do we bring about this change, are going to need to directly be linked to what are those influencing factors. So let's dig into it. Building a roadmap has to in some ways start with a solution, although you might have key outcomes in mind, right? You could start with the outcomes as well and thinking about big picture. What is our goal? What do we hope to accomplish? What is the measurable difference we hope to see? That's totally a fair place to start. But starting with the solution here and building out the roadmap, you're asking the question, what are the key components of our intervention? Or, right, going back to my recipe analogy, what are the key ingredients? And so you might think about this in terms of, what do we want people to do? If we need partnership to happen between TANF and child welfare, what exactly does that partnership look like? Define it. You also might think about, what are the underlying values and beliefs of this change, right? What are those guiding principles that should really be the foundation for a focus on prevention? For example, you might need to have a shared belief and understanding that more concrete economic resources in the hands of families, it gives them the best chance to buffer against crises and shocks and not be engaged with child welfare. That might be a principle that we all need to believe in. You need to consider who needs to change. What's the process for carrying out this wraparound care process? What are the resources that we need? Do staff need tablets? Do they need new worksheets? Do they need a new protocol? And so I've made up a TANF Child Welfare Prevention Initiative here. I haven't trademarked it yet, so any of you are welcome to borrow it. But you can see how a solution could be formed by these core principles, people, process, and resources. I was rolling with the P's, but resources is not a P, so sorry. Principles, right, are those key values that define what it is that you want to have happen. The people, who are those key players? Maybe a family advocate, a TANF case manager, a child welfare prevention specialist. What's the process, right? Okay, we've got this new SOAR intake meeting that we're going to do. We're building out family strengthening accounts, which allows workers to provide flexible funding to families to absorb shocks and prevent shocks. There's goal setting and regular coaching. We have this new AI reach first text to chat software where people can get in touch with their prevention specialist right away if they feel like a crisis is afoot. And then there's this monthly staff teaming that we're doing across TANF and child welfare. Okay, so that's the process as a part of our solution. And then we've got this set of resources here, right? We've got a new SOAR assessment. We've got a teaming process guide. We've got these coaching tools and processes, and we've got this texting technology. So that's your what? That's your set of ingredients, right? I can't bake this cake without this set of ingredients. Everybody with me? All right, I saw at least a couple head nods. So then, right, if I've got a solution, then I need to think about what are those factors? What are the factors? If this is what I want to have happen, these are my ingredients. What are the factors that are going to help and hinder me take those ingredients and turn them into something powerful? And we have to start here because if we don't know what our factors that are going to help and hinder us are, then we can't really come up with good change strategies, right? Because the change strategies have to directly address the things that are going to help and hinder us. So here we're thinking about what abilities do people have? What abilities do they not have? What opportunities exist? What opportunities don't exist? What motivation exists? And what motivation might be at cross purposes or doesn't exist? And you might also need to think here in terms of layers, right? Your context is like an onion. There's the individual, and then there's the team, and then there's the organization, and then there's the broader environment, whether that's your tribe, your community, your district, your region, your county, your state. Lots of layers. And the bad news is every one of those layers needs attention. But the good news is that thinking about each of them makes you a lot more prepared to deal with all the things that are going to come along the way. So some examples, right? What might help me implement this intervention? Well, it might be that my staff having a knowledge of the evidence on concrete supports. Bring in the Chapin Hall team, and that's going to be super helpful for them to understand all of this robust evidence. They also need to have an ability to employ the coaching model, an ability to facilitate this new SOAR intake approach. They need to understand what qualifies for our new family strengthening accounts. They need to believe in family agency and choice to make decisions with this flexible funding without micromanagement. Right? So just a couple of them. What might hinder this? Well, it might be a belief about deservedness, right? Because if there's a widespread belief about who deserves what and who doesn't deserve stuff, then families might not gain access to these resources and funds in the way that we want them to. That could be a hindrance. The compliance-focused mindset around TANF requirements might also get in our way, or maybe an overemphasis on barrier identification and remediation. Program siloing, right? TANF is over here, child welfare is over here. We got a big old gulf in between us. That's going to get in the way. And so as you come up with this list, then you're ready to think about, all right, so if we've got my ingredients, now I need to think about a process for change that addresses these factors. I want to build on and strengthen my help factors, and I want to mitigate, reduce, and tackle my hinder factors. So change strategies are really about how are you going to change mindsets and behaviors and skill sets. It's the process of baking the ingredients and bringing them all together. How are we going to address the help and hinder factors? How are we going to bring about change? Right? So continuing with a little example here, if my staff need to understand how to facilitate the SOAR intake approach, then I can educate and train them on a process. I can get in front of a room and I can model the approach for them. I can conduct observations of them doing the SOAR approach and give them feedback. If I need my team to believe in family agency and choice, what I don't want to do is stand up in front of a room with a PowerPoint slide on values and principles and just talk at them, right? Because how effective is that really going to be? Is that going to change people's belief in family agency and choice? Maybe, but that's not primarily a strategy of training and education. That actually might primarily be a strategy of, let's hear from clients. Let's hear about the impact that this can make for a family, what it can help them accomplish, what it can help them avoid. That could reinforce the program vision around this. And maybe I need for staff incentives to actually come together and team with their child welfare partners. Maybe we'll create a bridge builder of the month, and there's a bonus associated with that, or there's a free lunch, or there's a work from home for an entire week. Something, right, that just gives people the extra incentive and motivation to do some of the behaviors that we're asking them to do. And when I think about my hinder factors, right, maybe one of those is this mistrust that families will choose to use these funds in ways that we don't really think are appropriate or best. The way we really should spend it on this. Well, that might require some education and training on process, modeling the approach of how to talk about this and conducting observations. But it might also, again, come back to how do we bring in the client voice and the experience to help educate, inform, and empower staff to see how families are in a good position to make some of these decisions. As you think about the connection between these factors, what's going to help you and what's going to hinder you, and the change strategies, this grid can be really helpful for framing it up, right? As I mentioned before, capabilities. That's really relating to knowledge, skills, memory, decision-making, habits. And the strategies that are going to help, if that's the problem or if that's the strength, are going to be education, training, and modeling. But if what we're talking about here is an opportunity, right? It's something about your environment or something about the resources that you have or something about outside influence, then training and education are not really going to do it. This is going to be more of how do we enable people to act? How do we restructure the environment? How do we restrict their choices so that they can't do this thing? And similarly with motivation, right? If this is about beliefs and emotions, goals, intentions, optimism or pessimism, then again, training and education probably isn't going to do it. We need to think about persuading, incentivizing, maybe some modeling, and maybe some educating, but primarily that's going to look different than just a training workshop. So we've talked about the solution, we've talked about influencers, and we've talked about the change strategies. That should link up with outcomes. So whether you start here or you end here, outcomes are key, right? What does success look like? What's our primary goal? And how will we know we've achieved it? Thinking about that both in the short and the medium or long term. So again, some examples, right? In the short term, it might be things like all families set and make progress on at least 2 goals a month. All families have engaged and accessed a family strengthening account by month 2. Greater than 95% of participation by all parties in monthly teaming sessions, right? But in the longer term, you're setting some ambitious targets here. Maybe it's, after 6 months, we want to see a 10% reduction in the number of active TANF cases that then open a new child welfare investigation. And after 18 months, we want to see a 25% reduction. So being able to name those short and long-term goals, what we're able to do is to step back and think about, does that tell a compelling story? Could I sell that to somebody? Would a family look at that and say, that makes a lot of sense, sign me up. I'll do that tomorrow. Your solution, what you're doing. Your change strategies, how we're going to do it. And that's built on an understanding of what might influence what we're doing. And that should lead to a set of outcomes. You should be able to tell a compelling story right to left and left to right. If you can't, get back together with your team and refine it. Or if you have questions about that, well, then you're ready to move to the improve phase, because that's what it's all about. It's taking that roadmap draft. Here's what we want to do. Here's how we want to do it. And then say, let's test it out. But hey, this is pretty complex, right? That whole thing that John just outlined, that's a complex initiative. We can't do all that at once. So we're going to take one part of the solution and some of the change strategies, and we're going to start testing those. That's where we want to go with a road test. That's what the improve phase is all about. Start big picture, map it all out, pick one piece to start with, and one step at a time. So when are you ready to do a road test? That's a question I get asked a lot. There's no definitive answer. And I'll also say nobody's ever really ready for a road test, just like nobody's ever really ready for parenthood. You just embrace it when it comes. And so some things that could help you think about this are that you've mapped out your solution, right? It's going to be really hard to pilot or road test something in a meaningful, intentional way if you don't have a guide, right? If I'm baking with no recipe or ingredient list, nobody's really going to be able to check over that work and help me refine it other than to taste what I've made and decide whether they like it or not. You're going to be much more precise in your ability to fine tune what you're doing if you have a clear recipe to follow and tweak. How'd you make that cake, Grandma? Oh, I just kind of throw things together. There's no ability to replicate or fine tune that without the clarity of the ingredients and the process. Second, you also have to identify a part of your solution to test. Sometimes you have to pilot your whole initiative, and I get that, but you're going to be more equipped to fine tune it if you can pick one piece or a couple pieces. That's also going to reduce the burden and the change fatigue on your staff. So start small. If you aim small, then you're going to miss small. And that's going to allow you to tweak, address failures quickly, and make things work in the big scheme of things without all of the burden and the fallout of, hey, we rolled this thing out and then we have to claw it back because it didn't go as expected. You're also getting ready to road test if you have one or more questions that you want to answer about your solution, right? How's this SOAR analysis going to work? How are we going to actually move the money around for this family strengthening account? A road test is well suited to help you work through those implementation questions. And then lastly, if you're ready to commit to a limited test for 4 to 8 weeks, this is not about boiling the ocean. It's about starting small and testing something for a short period of time with a few people. So this can look like a process where maybe you take 5 managers and you're using a new supervision practice with 2 supervisees each for 4 weeks, right? Then you come back together, you look at what you've learned, and then you try it again. Or maybe it worked really well, and so you can move on to the next thing, right? But it's this notion of iteration. So let's talk about the process of preparing to road test. All right, John, we want a road test. We love this. Or John, we're piloting. What do you mean? What does this look like? So here's my fancy animation of the day. I want to invite you on my fast LC road test bus. All right. First thing, what will you test? You got to be able to answer that question. You can't just go into a pilot and say, okay, we're going to try this thing out for 6 months. We'll look at our data. And if it looks good, we'll tell the governor's office that he should fund the next phase, right? No, specifically, what are we testing? And ideally, that question is not one of impact. Did it work? Did it not? That's not what we want to ask. What we want to ask here is, how is it working? Because if you can answer the how question, you are much more likely to actually find an impact down the road because you have gotten things to work as well as they could in implementation. So start with that. What will you test? Question number 2, what factors are going to shape that test? Where can you start? Maybe you're the state of Michigan and you've got 3 pilot districts, right? So they are eager, ready, and willing to try this out. Great, start there. The factors that are going to shape our test is we got some willing districts. Or maybe you're the Chippewa Cree tribe, and you've got one or two case managers who's really ready to dig in and focus on this new care coordination model. Great, start there. Maybe you're Arizona and you're experiencing some budget cuts. Not that you are, but if you were, that might shape the test, right? We've got to do more with less. So think about those factors that are going to shape the test. What can you do? What can't you do? Who's ready and willing? Who's not? Third, what are your learning objectives? What exactly do we want to know about this SOAR assessment? What exactly do we want to know about how families are using the family strengthening account? What exactly do we want to understand about how TANF and child welfare staff are communicating with each other? Because those questions are then going to determine what methods and data you're going to use. How will I answer that question? Are we going to analyze the family strengthening accounts data? Are we going to huddle up with supervisors and staff on a bi-weekly basis to unpack how they're teaming with their child welfare colleagues? How are you going to answer the questions? Which is to say, what data are you going to use? And then lastly, what's your plan? Pull it together, right? Who's involved? What are they doing? When are they doing it? How are we gathering information? And so you may be wondering, like, okay, well, we don't really have a data collection team here. So what does that look like? There's some low burden ways to gather data. Every one of you teams can do it, right? A great opportunity at team huddles and meetings. Those are prime real estate for data collection. Anytime your team gets together is a data collection opportunity. All you need are a set of questions to guide the team. And then maybe somebody to take some notes, right? What do we want to know? Let's ask the team at the meeting. Somebody's documenting it. And then you can step back and look over those notes and say, okay, what are the themes? It might also be that you could do a quick survey once a week, once every other week. Google Forms, SurveyMonkey, there's lots of free and available tools that will help you do this quickly. Those are great resources. Third, listening sessions. This is another great one to offer to clients and families, right? Offer a lunch, provide some sort of incentive, bring people in and ask them questions. Take notes on what they say, and then step back and look at what are the themes. Lastly, you can use some human-centered design activities. I could do a whole presentation on this. For now, I'm just going to name some of my favorite, and you can talk with your coach about it. I'm happy to talk more about it. But Rose, Thorn, Bud, thinking about the strengths, the challenges, and the opportunities is a great brainstorming exercise that anybody can use. Grab a stack of sticky notes, jot down your roses, your thorns, and your buds. Instantly, you'll have 50 data points among your team of 5 people, right? Or another one is plus delta. What's working well? What will we change? Delta, the Greek symbol for change. A simple, easy activity to just get rapid feedback from people. What's on your radar is another one where you sort of create this matrix type diagram and you divide it into categories and you ask people, what's on your mind? What's top of mind for you in these categories? And then they prioritize it. What's most important? Maybe what's least resonant and important right now. And then empathy mapping, a way to just step back and think about a particular group of people. Maybe it's clients, maybe it's frontline staff. And you ask yourself, what do they say, do, think, and feel on this issue? What do they currently say, do, think, and feel on this issue? And then you can do an aspirational empathy map, which is to say, what do I want them to say, do, think, and feel on this issue? And then look at the gap between the two. Great ways to get and generate information and input from people. All right. So if you get data, right? If you talk to the team, if you do a listening session, if you do a survey or a human-centered design activity, what do you do with that information? Again, John, we're not research. We don't have a research analyst who can sit down and analyze all data. What do you want me to do? 3 quick things. Look for patterns and themes in your notes, in your data sets, in your Excel spreadsheets, in your SurveyMonkey dashboard. What are the patterns and the themes that you see in the data? Second, look for exceptions and outliers. Those can be important too. They might truly be an outlier, but they might also be an important outlier because it could be somebody who's marginalized or disadvantaged and not being well served as the majority are and as the status quo benefits. And then lastly, lead with curiosity and work together to make sense of the data. This is where leaders can bring along frontline staff and even clients and families and partners to explore the patterns and the themes and the exceptions and the outliers. Because then we're starting to ask questions with curiosity of, hey, what do you see? Because what I see might be different from what Jeanette sees, which might be different from what Rachel sees. And that's powerful. We can then start to look at that data together and say, okay, let's get all of our perspectives out on the table, right? This is a human-centered design concept of divergent thinking. Let's explore all the different ways of interpreting this, our ideas on it. What are the possibilities? What are all the perspectives? Go big. And then consensus building or convergent thinking. Let's come back together around themes and trends. And let's prioritize, build consensus where we see agreement among ourselves. But importantly, make note and revisit the areas where there's disagreement or a lack of consensus. We can't ignore those. But what we should focus on is making sure we have some areas of consensus, that those are prioritized, and then we circle back around to the areas where we don't have consensus. Ultimately, this should bring you back to your roadmap for change, which is why you should start there. Because as you go through a road test and you gather this information, you're coming back to reflect on, I baked that recipe. Did it actually turn out in the way that I wanted it to? How was that experience? And what do I need to tweak or change about this recipe in order for those outcomes to be more and more likely, or in order for us to better address these help and hinder factors? All right. That's what I wanted to share with you today about roadmaps and road tests. I know that was probably a lot of information, but I also hope that it was something that you can continue to think on and digest today as you hear from a couple of other teams, and then also have a chance to debrief and digest it with your coach in team time. If you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Right now, though, I would love to bring in some examples. So I'm going to invite Joe and our friends from Team Kentucky to share a little bit about their integrated case management pilot under the previous TANF Learning Community, to give you a little illustration of what this can look like in real life. Do we have...
Hey, everybody, sorry about that.
There we go. It's like I knew I saw you on there.
I'm here. Yeah, I was just a genius today and I forgot my headset, so I've been like switching between calling on the computer and everything else. But thanks to patience, guys. So I am lucky enough to be joined by Jessica Womack from Kentucky, who helped lead the team during the TANF Learning Community. So I want to give us all a nice round of applause and welcome Jessica. And I think we can kick off this initial discussion by just asking Jessica, could you give us a little context about what Kentucky was working on during the LASER-TLC?
Sure. So we had decided in late 2021, before the LASER-TLC had begun, that we needed to modernize our TANF-funded cash assistance programs. In Kentucky, we collectively refer to it as KTAP. And you know, our benefit levels had not changed, and our income limits were extremely low, hadn't changed in a couple of decades. Still had AFDC policy in there, and we just wanted to look at how we could bring the program forward into being a little bit more relevant, for lack of a better word, to how people are living now. So that was kind of where we were coming from, the ideas that we were coming from when we started LASER TLC. And then when we first started talking with you guys, we I think had originally wanted to see if we could do like a virtual case management pilot kind of thing. During COVID, so many folks were doing doctor's visits and things like that over their phones. Hey, why can't we do case management that way? And we kind of quickly figured out that that might not be the most the best use of that project in that time, because there's so many folks here in Kentucky that don't have reliable internet access, or they wouldn't have devices and they couldn't get places. So we kind of abandoned that idea and went on to this idea of integrated case management. We thought, if we've done through COVID, we lost so many so many staff were not working with us anymore. We were having staffing crises. We were seeing people who were genuinely in crisis so much. And it was kind of like, well, you just kind of have to get to the next person. You have to get off this call so you can get to the next call, or you have to get this person in front of your desk taken care of so you can get the next 15 people that are waiting in the lobby, or you have to process this case so you can get to the next 200 that are waiting to be processed. So it had very much become kind of this routine of data entry and data processing, and we kind of lost that personal touch that KTAP really was built on. And just seeing that case management wasn't really being done the way that we wanted to see it being done. So we thought the best use of that of the LASER TLC would be to develop this way of doing case management that was more human-centered, that was trauma-informed and trauma-responsive, to start trying to develop relationships again with our clientele, and really put the planning and the goals in their hands to determine what they can do with their own lives. And very much trying to empower folks to say, well, here's what I need to do with my time on KTAP, since it is limited. So that's kind of the context of where we were at with the integrated case management.
And Jessica, could you let us know what you guys are focusing on, what you wanted to learn during that road test that we did of the integrated case management approach?
Yeah, we had a couple of different road tests, as you remember, and we wanted to learn a little bit different things in different phases of it. So first of all, we wanted to see if we can get buy-in from our field staff about this integrated case management. Can we get folks who want to slow down and build relationships and build, go through a little bit more of an upfront approach, rather than, just kind of handling things as they kind of, putting out fires as they happen. So we wanted to test that overall. We started off our first road test in 2 counties. One was a little bit more urban and one was more rural, because sometimes what we find in Kentucky, most of Kentucky is rural, but we do have a few mid-sized cities. So a lot of times what we'll see is, well, an idea will work in the rural counties, but it doesn't really work in the urban ones, or it works in the urban ones and it doesn't work in rural. So we really wanted to see if we could make this work in both situations. And then with the second phase of the pilot, we wanted to see, could this work if there was only one case manager in a certain county? So the first phase of the pilot had at least 2. I think one county had 2 and one county had 3 case managers. So you could have somebody answering phone calls and somebody else taking clients as they came in through the door and somebody else making outbound follow-up calls. But would that work if you only had one case manager? And how would that work with local office supervision, with all the other things that need to be done in the office? So that was what we really wanted to know on the second pilot. And then when we finally did the third kind of rollout, we just wanted to see, can this work for a large group of counties? Can we make this work region-wide across multiple counties with different supervision and different resources in those counties and different needs as far as those counties went?
So with all that, the different ways that we were rolling out, the many different folks that you got input from, and just to get the whole sense of whether it was working effectively, what did that process for gathering feedback look like?
Well, we tried to, from the beginning of each meeting, whether it was with executive leadership, regional leadership, local office folks, we tried to begin and end each time we talk to them and tell them, this is only going to work if we have appropriate feedback from you guys. If you love it, let us know we love it and why we love it and what we love about it. If you hate it, we got to know that too. Like, what is it about it that needs to change that it would make it more applicable to you guys? If you like it overall, but there's this one little thing that doesn't work, you have to let us know that so that we can tweak it. And we really tried to come at them from the very beginning, and with this sort of, this is a co-created kind of thing. Like, yes, we have this big idea, but when it comes to actually implementing it and putting it in policy, you guys need to tell us what works for you. And then, of course, we created a Teams chat for each pilot group so that if they had, a quick question or a quick celebration or something like that, they could throw that in the chat. That those of us who are in central office working on this project were included in that chat, and we would kind of hype each other up and things like that. We had biweekly meetings with the pilot groups each time where we would, some of it was guided where we were trying to see, okay, well, here's what you guys have done, and what was your experience with this piece of it, and then some of it was just, throw it at us. What are you seeing? What do you love and what do you hate and what's going on? We had an electronic form, a log that was attached to that Teams chat, so that when they used integrated case management with a family, they could log it in that electronic form, and that would send it to us so that we could kind of go, oh, look, we've used it 40 times, or we've used it twice, or whatever it was. We had call services monitoring to see if maybe our call services like follow-ups were coming down. That's kind of what we were looking at seeing. If we spend more time at the beginning, maybe there'll be less calls about asking about questions because folks will already know what we have to offer. And then of course at the end of each pilot, we had a big debrief with the whole group. And then you guys, you and Robin also did some listening sessions with them without us, just in case they didn't want to hurt our feelings, which is not a concern as far as I know, but just so that they could kind of give you guys their thoughts without us being in the room, so to speak.
Yeah, I think that was the most I think it was the most interesting part of it, where we were having those discussions with you guys not in the room, and they were saying the exact same thing. So I think that really spoke to just how effective you guys were at building the buy-in and the trust and really doing that work in the beginning to set yourself up for success in the long term. I think we've got time for one more question here. And I think I'll expand it as just sort of a broader thing. What have you learned? What did you learn from your LASER TLC road test experience that has influenced your approach to other initiatives like the fast learning community?
What I mostly took from it is that the learn phase is called that for a reason. Sometimes I think we like to go, or I'll just speak for myself. I like to go in thinking that I know everything there is to know about a certain thing. Nobody knows everything, but I like to try to plan for every eventuality. And with these road tests, we quickly learned that there were things that, even though most of us had been, workers in the field at some point, we'd all been out of that work for a while, and COVID changed everything. So, we had a lot left to learn about what our case managers were really trying to do and what our TANF recipients were really going through at that time. So the learn phase is called that for a reason. Don't be scared to change it up in the middle if you need to.
The last bit that I would pepper in there too is you guys are also always moving in between learn, innovate, and improve. And it really was just like the idea, like I think a great example of we're always moving through those circuits. It's never really done. It's always going. So I think with that, I got to hand it back to John. But thank you so much for sharing your experience with us, Jessica. Looking forward to great news of road tests in the LASER TLC.
Thank you.
Got it.
Thanks, Jessica and Joe. Really appreciate that. And Jessica, I just wanted to flag, there was a question from Dana about what kind of cases are integrated in the chat. Perhaps you could just reply to her in the chat. sure others would be interested in that answer as well. For the sake of time, though, I want to go ahead and pivot us to the Chippewa Cree team. So the Chippewa Cree team also was part of the previous TANF Learning Community. And so we have Claire, one of the current coaches, as well as Elaine and Angelica from the Chippewa Cree tribe, just to share a little bit about their pilot related to the TANF office hours, which I think is a great example of how you can pick one small thing, test and tweak. So Claire, over to you.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Sean. Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Jessica. That was great. And with that, I'd like to welcome Elaine Topsky and Angel Sunchild Denny, both of whom were involved in Chippewa Cree's road test and previous involvement with LASER-TLC, where they arrived at and then implemented the decision, as John just introduced, the decision to change their office's hours and create an on-call case manager system for meeting with clients. So we're very grateful to Elaine and Angel that you're joining us again here in the FastLC and here today on this call. I'll kick it off. Elaine and Angel, I was hoping if you could tell us a little bit about your team's decision and process to change the tribal TANF office's hours and implement an on-call case manager system. What caused you all to arrive at that decision, and what issues were you trying to address?
Hello, I'm Angel. So can you guys hear me good? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So our program got COVID funds for our clients, and basically, you know, we come up with like different projects that we could do for our clients, such as buying them furniture, purchasing the furniture for them, or different appliances for, I guess, COVID related things. Anyways, our office happened to get really, really busy at that time. And so as case managers, we decided to do, like, I want to say on-call case management. So basically there's 3 of us case managers in the Rocky Boy TANF office, and what we did was on call. I think the reason why we did it was because of how busy our office actually got, and due to case managers being on leave. So a lot of the busyness, all of the clients would fall on one case manager or the other case manager. And it got really overwhelming. So we decided to do the on-call case management, which really, really helped. I think, how can I put this? I kind of put the stress on a lot of us. And yeah.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Angel. Elaine, do you have anything to add? Awesome. Well, thanks for introducing us to the process, Angel. So in the process of changing your office's hours and having the on-call case manager, you already, I think, got into this next question a little bit by talking about how, it helped address how, busyness and cases would fall on one case manager or another. And so kind of having someone always on call addressed, competing schedules and caseload so that folks would always have someone to come to in the office. What else did you learn about your office or about your program after those changes that you implemented? And how did you collect feedback about people's experiences with the change, whether there be the clients or the case managers?
This is Elaine. Can you hear me? It seems like I kind of hear it. Okay.
I can hear you both. I think Elaine and Angel, if one of you turns on mute, then I think the echo might go away.
Okay.
There we go.
We started this project
mainly because of the communication in our department, and it was important for me to have our team communicate with each other on a daily basis, and with the work, the efficient work, and just open communication across the board and with our clients too. So we started with that, and we started meeting twice a month with Brittany and address where we wanted to go. And during this time, it was during the COVID and coming off of COVID, we had many a lot going on in our department. You know, our department was closed. We didn't have a direct link to the people that we serve, the families. So it was sometimes really chaotic. And so we addressed some of those, and we did roadmaps of some of the ways, you know, that in our road of how we kind of got into a turnoff. We had to bring people back on track and talk about where we were at and what we wanted to do. So some of the things that we did is addressing, sometimes we would have a case manager not there, and then a client coming in and needing assistance right away. And that was when we decided as a team to have the on-call case manager, so that someone would be there on that certain day. So we can help people if they came in on an emergent type system, or any time if they had questions on their case. So that worked out really well, and we got through that. We started recently, we started opening up our office again to the public. People still are not really that comfortable in going to offices, but we have opened our doors, and people are able to come to our office, and things have settled down after the COVID and all the emergency situations that we had. And so now we're more comfortable with the way that we used to do business, in the ways that we communicate with each other, and that's with a calendar of activities for the clients in the community, and a calendar for staff on who's going to be on leave, for example, and having a checkout system. So if a person has to leave the building, then we want to know where that person went and how they can be reached, especially during an emergency or and these when a client comes in and wants to know, so that person can be reached at all times. We also have a group chat so that we can just send quick messages to each other just to let us know what's happening at that time, or if we happen to think that we're going to be late or not and have somewhere else to go, then we can share that so everyone knows what everyone is doing for that day.
Yeah.
So the calendar has worked really well. Also, our staff meetings, you know, it's really crucial that we talk to each other as a staff. So we have on Fridays we have our staff meetings, and we have those on a screen so everybody can see what it is that we're talking about, and to save it in a folder so we can always refer back to it. We recently had some problems with our computer, but we're getting back to that. It's important that we have that information ongoing. So from week to week, we can start our meeting to review from what we did from the week before, and they'll move forward on what we need to do for the next week. And it's also that way another staffing is being done that way with social services and child welfare. And that is one of the most important staffings that we've done in having these once a week with using the screen to look at the most at-risk families and what's going on with each one of those families, so that this week, this is what's happening and who's responsible on what to do with that family. And so that goes forward too, so that we are kept informed of those most serious cases. And I can't stress enough how important that staffing is, because we work with the most at-risk families, and we need to know if those children have been removed from that home, or if the parent is out of the home for some reason. So that's how we collaborate with social services, and one of our finer ways of networking, and so it's important that and staff like that. Staff agree that this is something that one of our best practices is those weekly staffing with staff, and then the other one with social services. So we did that mapping, and we have Brittany do that mapping for the 1.5 year work that we did. And some of those practices, it's up to us to keep them going, to make them work, and let everyone know, this is important for us to keep each other informed of what's happening daily, weekly, monthly, and then to plan. We want to plan 3 months at a time what our activities are going to be, and everyone knows, what it is that we're planning on doing, so that people can plan if they have to be on another assignment, for example. They'll know that this is their area, this is their project. That's what we're doing right now. We're working on what projects we're going to be working on this year, and who's going to be involved, who's going to take the lead in each one of those projects. And so that's I'm really happy to see that. We're sharing ideas and putting it up on these pieces of paper, and then we'll have our one person put it all together in a plan. So that has worked out very well for us.
Yeah. Well, Angel and Elaine, thank you so much for sharing more about your processes. I think what you both shared, and Elaine particularly, what you also just shared at the end, I think that this is a great example of, there is no change that is too small to have a massive snowballing effect on your program. I mean, at a high level, just doing something like changing your office hours or having an on-call case manager may seem, there are certainly direct impacts that are linked specifically to that decision. But from everything that you all were just outlining, I mean, it seems like it just led to a catapulting of other decisions, and has really opened up a lot of really meaningful avenues for ongoing communication between your teams that has, changed some of the ways that you do your meetings, some of the ways that you keep in touch outside of meetings, as you just described. So I really appreciated you all sharing more about your experience with the LASER-TLC. I think this is a really, really awesome example of the impact of road testing. So thank you both for sharing, and thank you for your time today.
And this is our 20th year of operation of the tribal TANF program, and it's we're flexible in what we can do compared to the state TANF. In the projects that we're doing, we could do youth projects, and we can address the boys and girls according to our culture. It's amazing, because culture and our language are so important. So we can instill those values in our young people, at what it means to be an Indian man and an Indian girl, and to strengthen our families, to let them know that we're here to support them and doing a wraparound session with them. But that's one of the best things that we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Oh, we're also close to the Canadian border. We're in Montana. We're 30 miles to the closest town. So those are challenges, the transportation, daycare, shopping. Those are all challenges that that's a normal way of life for us.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you, Elaine, for sharing more. Go to you, John.
I echo my thanks. Yeah, thank you, Elaine and Angel, for sharing, and Claire for facilitating. So to close out today's time together, we wanted you to have a little bit of time in your teams to kind of reflect on what you've heard and what you've learned. And so we are going to move into that now. I'll give you about 20 minutes to just chat with your team partners as well as your site coaches. And just the invitation here is not to do an activity not necessarily to make a big plan, but really just to digest what we discussed and think through some questions. You know, what feels relevant and resonant to us right now? Are we kind of at a road mapping stage or road testing stage, or what would some next steps look like for us? So Casey Gray has set up some breakout rooms with your team name. If you click that little button down at the bottom of your screen, you can join your team breakout. And if you need any help, feel free to just put in the chat or unmute, and we will gladly place you in a breakout. So we'll be back together here in just a little under 20 minutes.